She came with empty hands and a trembling voice. But the one thing she offered would shake a billionaire's guarded heart and change both their lives forever. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel, the place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again, because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. The rain had been falling for hours. Not the gentle kind that whispered against rooftops, but the heavy, relentless kind that soaked through clothes, skin, and dignity. The kind that made people hurry past each other without eye contact, each person protecting their own warmth. Rachel didn't have that luxury. She stood under the broken edge of a rusted bus stop shelter, clutching a thin nylon bag to her chest. Inside it were her only possessions: two neatly folded wrappers, a pair of worn slippers, and a small plastic container holding the last of the rice she had cooked the night before. Her eyes weren't on the rain. They were on her son. "Eat slowly, Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "Make it last." The little boy, no older than 5, nodded as he scooped small portions into his mouth, trying his best to obey. His tiny fingers trembled. Not from fear, but hunger that had learned patience too early. Rachel turned away slightly, pretending to adjust her scarf. In truth, she didn't want him to see her swallow hard. She hadn't eaten. Not yesterday. Not today. But mothers learned how to survive on less. Across the city, where the roads were dry and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and imported cologne, McPherson adjusted his cufflinks in silence. His reflection stared back at him from a floor-to-ceiling mirror. Sharp suit, controlled posture, expression unreadable. Perfect. And completely empty. "Your meeting is in 30 minutes, sir." His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "I know," he replied, his tone calm, detached. Everything about his life ran on precision. Meetings. Deals. Numbers. Outcomes. People admired him. Some feared him. Many wanted something from him. And that was exactly why he trusted no one. McPherson glanced at the dining table behind him. An elaborate spread of breakfast he hadn't touched. Again. Food had become routine, not pleasure. Life had become movement, not meaning. He picked up his car keys, pausing only briefly as something unnameable flickered through his chest. Then it vanished. Just like always. Back at the bus stop, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Rachel knelt in front of her son, wiping his mouth gently with the edge of her wrapper. "Good boy," she said with a faint smile. "Mummy, are we going home now?" Daniel asked. The question hit harder than the rain ever could. Home. What a heavy word. Rachel hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Soon," she said softly. But deep down, she knew the truth. They didn't have one anymore. The landlord had locked their door 2 days ago. Their belongings, what little they had, still inside. She had begged. She had pleaded. But sympathy didn't pay rent. And now she was out of options. Her fingers tightened slightly around the nylon bag. There was only one place left to go. One chance. Meanwhile, McPherson's car glided smoothly through the city streets, the rhythmic hum of the engine blending with the soft jazz playing in the background. He barely noticed the world outside. Until traffic slowed. His driver muttered something about congestion ahead. McPherson's gaze drifted absent-mindedly toward the window. And that's when he saw her. A woman. Standing by the roadside with a child. Soaked. Still. Unmoving. There was something about the way she stood. Not begging, not chasing cars, not calling out, that caught his attention. She simply stood there, like someone who had run out of places to go. For reasons he couldn't explain, McPherson frowned slightly. "Why is she just standing there?" he murmured. The driver shrugged. "Sir, people like that, they wait for luck." McPherson's eyes lingered a second longer. Then he looked away. "Drive." The car moved. And just like that, the moment passed. Or at least it should have. Rachel watched the expensive black car disappear into the distance, her grip tightening unconsciously. Not because she expected anything from it, but because for a brief second she had felt seen. She exhaled slowly. "Come, Daniel," she said, taking his hand. "We're going somewhere." "Where, Mummy?" Rachel looked ahead, her eyes steady despite the storm still raging inside her. "To ask for help." An hour later, they stood in front of a massive gate. Tall, imposing, untouchable. The kind of place that reminded you instantly of your position in the world. Daniel squeezed her hand. "Mummy, who lives here?" Rachel swallowed. "A man who has everything," she said quietly. Then, almost like a whisper meant only for herself. "Except maybe the reason to notice someone like me." She hesitated. Her hand hovered near the gate. Her heart pounded. Not from fear of rejection, but from the weight of dignity she was about to risk. Because asking for help always costs something. She closed her eyes briefly, then knocked. Backhand index pointing right before we continue. What do you think will happen when Rachel finally meets McPherson? Will he ignore her like everyone else? Or will something unexpected happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one. The gate didn't open immediately. It never did for people like her. Rachel stood there, her hands still hovering in the air long after the knock had echoed and died. The silence that followed felt louder than rejection itself. Daniel shifted beside her. "Mummy, should we go?" She tightened her grip on his small fingers. "No," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Not this time." Because this time, leaving wasn't an option. Inside the compound, a security camera tilted slightly, watching, judging, recording. And somewhere beyond the towering walls, a man who had built his life on control paused mid-step. "Sir," the head security officer said through the intercom, "there's a woman at the gate. She's been standing there for a while." McPherson didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. People came to his gate often. Job seekers, opportunists, people with rehearsed stories and calculated desperation. He had trained himself to ignore them all. But something in the guard's tone made him ask, "Is she alone?" "No, sir. She has a child with her." A pause. Small. Barely noticeable. But enough. McPherson exhaled slowly, walking toward the control panel. His fingers hovered over the screen, and then almost unconsciously, he pulled up the camera feed. And there she was. The same woman. From the roadside. Still soaked, though the rain had stopped. Still standing, though exhaustion clung to her posture. But what caught him wasn't her condition. It was her eyes. They weren't begging. They weren't even hopeful. They were steady, as if she had already prepared herself for rejection. And decided to stand anyway. McPherson frowned slightly. "Let her in," he said. The gates opened with a slow, heavy sound. Rachel flinched. Not out of fear, but disbelief. For a moment she didn't move. Then Daniel tugged her hand. "Mummy, it's opening." She swallowed hard. "Yes. I can see." Her legs felt heavier with each step as she walked into the compound. The ground beneath her feet was smooth, polished, so different from the muddy streets she had just left behind. Everything here felt distant, untouchable, like a world she wasn't meant to enter. McPherson stood at the top of the wide staircase, watching her approach. Up close, she looked even more fragile. Not weak, just worn, like someone who had fought too many battles without rest. And yet, she held herself with a quiet kind of dignity that didn't belong to desperation. It unsettled him. People in her position usually came with urgency, with noise, with persuasion. But she walked slowly, carefully, as if she was trying not to disturb the air around her. When she finally stood a few steps away, silence stretched between them. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. Rachel lowered her eyes briefly, not in submission but in respect. "Good afternoon, sir." Her voice was soft, but it didn't shake. McPherson didn't respond immediately. He studied her the way he studied business deals, looking for cracks, hidden intentions, something beneath the surface. But all he saw was exhaustion. And something else. Pride. Why are you here? He asked bluntly. No softness. No pretense. Just truth. Daniel squeezed Rachel's hand tighter. She felt it. That silent reminder. You have to speak. Her throat tightened. Words gathered. But none seemed worthy enough. Because how do you summarize struggle? How do you package pain into something acceptable? She inhaled slowly. Then looked up. And for the first time, their eyes met fully. She started, then paused. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because this moment would define everything. McPherson waited. Impatient. Unmoved. Used to control. Used to answers. Rachel's voice came again. Quieter this time. But deeper. I don't have much to offer, sir. A faint breeze passed through the compound, lifting the edge of her wrapper slightly. Her fingers tightened around Daniel's hand. McPherson's gaze didn't shift. Something in his chest stilled. Not because of what she said, but how she said it. No performance. No manipulation. Just truth. Raw. Bare. Unfiltered. She swallowed. Then finished. But I can cook. Silence. Not the empty kind. The kind that fills the space between two lives, just before they change. McPherson blinked once. That was all. But inside, something unfamiliar shifted. He had expected a story. A request. A plea. But not this. Not simplicity. Not honesty without decoration. He tilted his head slightly. That's it. Rachel nodded. Yes, sir. No excuses. No added explanations. Just that. Daniel looked up at his mother, then at the man standing before them. Mummy makes the best food, he said suddenly, his small voice cutting through the tension. Even when we don't have much. Rachel's heart clenched. Daniel, she whispered, embarrassed. But the words were already out. And somehow they lingered. McPherson's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to her. Something tightened in his jaw. Not anger. Not irritation. Something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. He turned away slightly, walking a few steps down before stopping again. Do you know how many people come here asking for opportunities? He said, his voice calm but distant. Rachel didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. The answer was obvious. Too many. He faced her again. And you think cooking is enough? The question wasn't cruel. But it wasn't kind either. It was real. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly. Not visibly. But enough for her to feel it. This was the moment. The breaking point. Where pride either holds or shatters. She lifted her chin just a little. Her voice didn't rise. But it carried something stronger than confidence. Truth. It's not everything, sir, she said quietly. A pause. Then. But it's the only honest thing I have left. That did it. Something inside McPherson cracked. Not open. Not fully. But enough for light to slip through. Because in a world full of people offering what they think he wants, she offered the one thing no one ever did. The truth. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have a prepared response. Didn't have a calculated decision. Just a feeling. Unfamiliar. Unsettling. But real. Stay, he said suddenly. The word came out before he could reconsider. Rachel blinked. I'm sorry, sir. McPherson turned away again, his tone returning to controlled neutrality. I need a cook. A pause. Then. You can start today. Rachel's breath caught. Not relief. Not yet. Because moments like this sometimes came with hidden conditions. Sir. You'll be paid, he interrupted. And you'll have a place to stay. For you and the boy. Daniel's eyes lit up. Mummy. Rachel squeezed his hand gently, stopping him. Her gaze remained fixed on McPherson. Searching. Not for generosity. But for intention. Why? She asked softly. The question surprised even her. But it needed to be asked. Because nothing in her life had ever come without a cost. McPherson paused. For a moment, the truth almost surfaced. But he buried it. I need someone who can cook, he said simply. Rachel studied him for a second longer. Then nodded. Not because she fully believed him. but because she had reached the end of resistance. And sometimes, survival required stepping into the unknown. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. As she followed the house staff inside, Daniel holding her hand tightly, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safety. Not yet. But possibility. Behind them, McPherson remained where he stood. Watching. Thinking. Feeling something he didn't understand. And in the quiet of that moment, one simple sentence echoed in his mind. "I don't have much to offer, but I can cook." Backhand index pointing right. Pause for a moment. If you were in McPherson's place, would you have let her stay? Or would you have turned her away like everyone else did? Tell me honestly in the comments. I want to hear your heart on this. The room was too clean. That was the first thing Rachel noticed. Not beautiful. Not comfortable. Just clean. Everything was in its place. The bed neatly spread. The curtains perfectly aligned. The faint scent of lavender lingering in the air like it had been placed there deliberately. It didn't feel like a room meant for living. It felt like a room meant for someone else. Daniel ran his small hands across the bed, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mummy, is this really ours?" Rachel hesitated at the door. "Ours." The word echoed in her chest, unfamiliar, fragile. She stepped in slowly, placing her nylon bag on the table, like it might stain the polished surface just by touching it. "For now," she said gently. But even as she said it, something inside her refused to settle. Because nothing in her life had ever lasted for now. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the fabric. Soft. Too soft. Her body tensed instead of relaxing. This wasn't comfort. This was borrowed peace. And borrowed things always had conditions. Meanwhile, across the house, McPherson stood by the window of his office, staring out at the quiet compound. He had already returned to work. Or at least, he was supposed to. Files lay open on his desk. His laptop screen glowed with unread emails. But his mind wasn't there. It was elsewhere. Unfocused. Unsettled. "I don't have much to offer, sir. But I can cook." The words came back again. Uninvited. Persistent. Annoying. He exhaled sharply, closing his laptop. Ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. Why was he thinking about it? About her? She was just a worker. Temporary. Replaceable. Just like everyone else. But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. And that's exactly what bothered him. Later that evening, the kitchen came alive. The soft clatter of pots. The rhythm of chopping. The quiet hum of something real. Rachel moved with practiced ease, her hands steady despite the unfamiliar environment. This was where she belonged. Not in the polished room. Not in the silent hallways. But here, where effort turned into something tangible. Where survival had once tasted like hope. One of the house staff, a middle-aged woman named Grace, leaned against the counter watching her. "You're new," she said, her tone neutral but observant. Rachel nodded. "Yes." Grace studied her for a moment. "You're lucky," she added. Rachel paused slightly. "Lucky?" Grace let out a small, dry laugh. "People don't just walk into this house and get offered a place to stay. Not without something attached." The words settled heavily in the air. Rachel's grip on the knife tightened. "I'm here to work," she said quietly. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Aren't we all?" The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It wasn't hostile either. Just loaded. Rachel returned to her cooking, but her thoughts were no longer steady. Because Grace had said what she had been trying not to think. Nothing comes without a cost. Dinner was served at exactly 8 p.m. As always. McPherson sat at the head of the long dining table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Routine. Control. Distance. Rachel stood at the edge of the room, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. Watching. Waiting. Not for praise. But for reaction. McPherson picked up his fork. Paused. Then took a bite. The moment stretched. Slow. Heavy. Critical. For a second, nothing changed. Then, a flicker. Subtle. Barely noticeable. But real. The food was good. Not just good. It was He stopped the thought immediately, set his fork down, maintained his composure. "You may leave," he said calmly, without looking at her. Rachel blinked. That was it. No feedback. No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. She nodded slightly. "Yes, sir," and turned to leave. But something inside her resisted. Not loudly, not boldly, just enough to hurt. Because for a brief moment, she had hoped. Not for praise, but for recognition. Back in the kitchen, Grace watched her carefully. "Well," she asked. Rachel forced a small smile. "He ate." Grace chuckled softly. "That's already something." But Rachel didn't respond. Because she understood something now. Very clearly. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't connection. This was arrangement. Upstairs, McPherson pushed his plate away after a few more bites. He wasn't hungry anymore. Or maybe he didn't want to feel. Because the food had stirred something. Something warm. Something familiar. Something he had buried a long time ago. He stood abruptly, walking toward the window. "Don't get used to it," he muttered to himself. "This changes nothing." But even as he said it, he knew it already had. That night, Rachel lay beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. Too quiet. "Mummy," Daniel whispered sleepily. "Are we safe here?" The question pierced through her chest. She turned slightly, brushing his hair gently. "I don't know," she admitted softly. Because safety wasn't just about shelter. It was about certainty. And right now, everything felt uncertain. Across the house, McPherson stood in the dark, his silhouette barely visible against the window. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel completely empty. And that unsettled him more than loneliness ever had. Because emptiness, he understood. But this quiet shift, this unfamiliar presence, this slow, creeping feeling of something changing, he didn't trust it. And so without saying it out loud, both of them made the same silent decision. "Don't get attached." Backhand index pointing right. "Let me ask you something. Do you think Rachel is right to be cautious? Or should she allow herself to trust this opportunity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective." The house was too big for silence. It echoed. Not loudly, but subtly. In the long hallways, in the polished floors, in the spaces between footsteps. Rachel noticed it the next morning. Every movement felt heard. Every breath, out of place. She woke early, long before the rest of the house stirred. Old habits didn't fade easily. Survival had trained her body to rise before dawn, to prepare before the world demanded anything. But here, there was nothing chasing her. No landlord. No hunger knocking at the door. No uncertainty about where the next meal would come from. And yet, she couldn't rest. Daniel slept peacefully beside her, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm she hadn't seen in weeks. Rachel watched him quietly, then whispered, almost like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, "This has to work." Downstairs, the kitchen lights flickered on. The familiar comfort of ingredients, utensils, and fire greeted her like an old friend. She exhaled. Here she could breathe. But she wasn't alone. McPherson stood by the counter, already dressed, his sleeves slightly rolled up. Rachel froze. Not out of fear, but surprise. "You're awake," he said without looking at her. His voice was calm, neutral, controlled. "Yes, sir," she replied quickly, stepping back slightly as if she had intruded. "I didn't expect anyone here." McPherson picked up a glass of water, taking a slow sip. "This is my house." The words weren't harsh, but they drew a line. Clear, defined, uncrossable. Rachel nodded. "Of course, sir." She moved toward the other side of the kitchen, keeping a respectful distance. But the space suddenly felt smaller. They worked in silence. The sound of chopping, water running, the faint crackle of heat from the stove. But silence between two people is never empty. It speaks. And right now, it spoke of tension, of unfamiliarity, of two worlds forced into the same room. McPherson watched her from the corner of his eye. Not directly. just enough to notice. The way her hands moved, careful, precise. The way she paused slightly before reaching for anything, like she was asking permission without words. The way she kept her gaze lowered, not out of weakness but restraint. "You don't have to act like that," he said suddenly. Rachel looked up, confused. "Like what, sir?" McPherson set the glass down. "Like you're afraid of touching something." A small pause. Then, "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "No." Rachel hesitated, then spoke with honesty that surprised even her. "I just don't want to feel like I don't belong here." That landed harder than expected. McPherson turned fully toward her now, studying her face. "You're here to work," he said. "That's your place." The words were simple, clear, final. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." But something in her eyes shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. Because she understood. Perfectly. This wasn't home. This wasn't belonging. This was permission. Temporary. Conditional. And she would not forget that. Later that day, something unexpected happened. The power went out. The entire house fell into sudden stillness. No hum of electricity. No quiet buzz of machines. Just silence. Daniel ran out of the room, his voice slightly panicked. "Mummy." Rachel rushed to him immediately, kneeling down. "It's okay," she said softly, pulling him close. "It's just light. It will come back." But Daniel held on tighter. "I don't like the dark." Before she could respond, a voice came from behind. "There's a backup generator." McPherson. He stood at the end of the hallway, his presence calm, almost unaffected by the sudden change. But his eyes lingered on the boy, on the way he clung to his mother, on the fear he didn't try to hide. "Why isn't it on?" Rachel asked quietly. McPherson glanced toward the control panel. "It needs to be reset manually." A pause. Then, "I'll handle it." But as he turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped him. "Please don't go." The words were small, fragile, but they held something deeper than fear. McPherson froze. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Too well. He turned slowly. Daniel's grip tightened around Rachel. "Mummy, tell him not to go." Rachel hesitated. This wasn't her place, not her boundary to cross. But then she looked at her son, and something shifted. "Sir," she began softly, "I think he's just scared." McPherson's jaw tightened slightly. For a moment, it looked like he might walk away anyway, like he might choose distance, control, familiarity. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "It's just the dark," he said, his voice quieter now. "Nothing is going to happen." Daniel peeked up at him. "You're sure?" McPherson nodded once. "Yes." A beat. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel reached out and held his hand. The contact was small, but it was everything. McPherson stiffened instantly, his entire body reacting to something it wasn't used to. Connection. Unfiltered. Unasked. For a second, he almost pulled away. But then, he didn't. He stood there, still, letting the small hand remain in his. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. Rachel watched them both, her heart caught somewhere between fear and something she didn't want to name, because moments like this, they blurred lines. And blurred lines were dangerous. The lights flickered back on. The generator kicked in. The house returned to life. Daniel let go slowly, smiling. "I told you, Mummy, nothing happened." Rachel forced a smile. "Yes, nothing." But her eyes drifted to McPherson, who was already stepping away, rebuilding the distance, restoring the control. "Stay with your mother," he said briefly, then walked off. But something had changed. Because for the first time, they weren't just employer and worker. They weren't just strangers under the same roof. They had shared a moment. Small, simple, but real. And moments like that had consequences. Backhand index pointing right. Let's pause here for a second. Did you feel that shift between them? Do you think moments like this bring people closer? Or make things more complicated? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. The rain returned that night. Soft this time. Not angry like before, just steady. Like a quiet reminder that storms didn't always come to destroy. Sometimes, they came to uncover. Rachel stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the pot in front of her. The soup had been ready for minutes. But she hadn't moved. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the surface of the liquid, distorted, broken into ripples. She barely recognized herself anymore. Not the woman who once laughed freely. Not the girl who believed love would be enough. You're overcooking it. The voice startled her. She turned quickly. McPherson stood by the doorway, his presence silent as always. I'm sorry, sir, she said, reaching immediately for the spoon. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the pot. You've been standing here for 5 minutes. Rachel paused. So he had been watching. I was just thinking, she said quietly. McPherson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for a plate and served himself without asking. Routine. Distance. But not quite the same as before. He took a bite. Then another. And for a moment, something softened in his expression. Barely. But it was there. This tastes familiar, he said suddenly. Rachel looked up. Familiar, sir? McPherson nodded slightly, still focused on the food. My mother used to cook something like this. The words slipped out before he could stop them. And just like that, the air changed. Because McPherson didn't talk about his past. Not to anyone. Not ever. Rachel noticed it. The shift. The hesitation that followed his own words. She lowered her gaze slightly, her voice gentle. She must have been a good cook. McPherson let out a faint, almost humorless breath. She was. A pause. Then. She died when I was young. The words were simple. Flat. But they carried weight. Heavy. Unresolved. Rachel didn't speak immediately. Because some truths didn't need quick responses. I'm sorry, she said softly. McPherson shrugged slightly, but it wasn't indifference. It was defense. It was a long time ago. But the way his jaw tightened said otherwise. Rachel hesitated. Then, without planning to, she spoke again. I lost someone too. That made him look up. Not out of curiosity, but something closer to recognition. My husband, she continued quietly. Silence. Deep. Waiting. He didn't die, she added. A small, bitter smile touched her lips. He just left. The words hung in the air. Sharp. Honest. McPherson didn't interrupt. Didn't question. Just listened. Rachel's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. I thought love was enough, she said. I thought if you gave everything, if you stayed patient, if you endured. Her voice faltered. Just slightly. He chose someone else. The simplicity of it made it hurt more. McPherson's expression didn't change much, but something inside him shifted. Because he understood loss. But not that kind. Not the kind where someone walks away while you're still standing there, holding everything you built together. Did he come back? He asked quietly. Rachel shook her head. No. Another pause. Would you take him back if he did? The question came faster than expected. Almost instinctive. Rachel blinked. Surprised. Then she shook her head again. Slower this time. No. McPherson studied her. Why? Rachel met his gaze. And for the first time, there was no hesitation. Because I learned something, she said. A beat. Then. Love shouldn't make you feel like you're not enough. That landed. Hard. McPherson looked away almost immediately. As if the words had touched something he wasn't ready to face. Because somewhere deep inside him, he had spent years believing something similar. That people only stayed for what he had, not for who he was. And yet, here she was, a woman who had nothing, offering the one thing he didn't understand: honesty. People leave, he said after a moment, his voice quieter now. It's what they do. Rachel didn't argue, didn't correct him. But she said something else. Something softer, stronger. Not everyone. The words lingered between them. Fragile, hopeful, dangerous. Because hope was the one thing both of them had learned to live without. A sudden sound broke the moment. Daniel's laughter from the other room. Light, free, unburdened. Both of them turned slightly toward the sound. Rachel smiled faintly. He doesn't remember much of his father, she said. And maybe that's a good thing. McPherson didn't respond, but his gaze lingered longer than usual. Children forget, he said eventually. Rachel shook her head gently. No, she whispered. They don't forget, they just learn to live without asking questions. That hit deeper than anything else she had said. Because suddenly, McPherson wasn't in his house anymore. He was a boy again, standing in a quiet room, waiting for a voice that never came back. He turned abruptly, placing the plate down. That will be all for tonight, he said. His tone had changed. Closed. Guarded again. Rachel nodded. Yes, sir. But she didn't move immediately. Because she understood something now. He wasn't cold. He was protecting something. Just like she was. As McPherson walked away, his steps slightly faster than usual, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Not everyone leaves. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he believed his own version of the truth anymore. That night, the rain continued. Soft. Steady. But inside that house, something much deeper had been uncovered. Not love. Not yet. But the truth behind their walls. And once truth is revealed, nothing stays the same. Backhand index pointing right. Let's pause here. Do you think sharing their past brought them closer? Or made things more complicated? And be honest. Do you believe Rachel when she says not everyone leaves? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your heart on this. The house felt different the next morning. Not in structure. Not in sound. But in presence. Rachel noticed it first. Not because anything had been said, but because of what hadn't. No tension. No cold dismissal. No sharp distance cutting through the air. Just quiet. She stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot slowly, her thoughts still lingering on the conversation from the night before. People leave. Not everyone. Those words had stayed with her, echoing. Softly. Dangerously. Because hope had a way of slipping in through the smallest cracks. And once it entered, it didn't leave easily. Mummy, can I help? Daniel's voice pulled her back. She turned, smiling faintly. Of course, she said, handing him a small spoon. But only stirring. No tasting yet. He grinned. Just a little? Rachel laughed softly. Just a little. The sound of her laughter filled the kitchen, light, genuine, and unfamiliar. Because it had been a long time since laughter came without effort. At the doorway, unnoticed, McPherson stood still. He hadn't planned to stop. Hadn't planned to watch. But something about the sound held him there. The way she smiled. The way the boy laughed. The way the space felt alive. It was foreign. And yet, strangely comforting. He stepped in slowly, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to walk away. Rachel noticed him immediately. Her smile faded slightly, not out of fear, but awareness. Good morning, sir, she said. McPherson nodded once. Morning. Daniel turned, his face lighting up. Sir. I'm helping Mummy cook. McPherson looked at him, then at the small spoon in his hand. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. I can see that, he said. Rachel blinked, because she had never seen that before. Not from him. Breakfast will be ready soon, she added quickly. McPherson didn't respond right away. Instead, he moved closer. Closer than usual. Too close. Rachel felt it. The shift. The space between them shrinking in a way that made her heart beat just a little faster. He reached for a cup, paused, then said, "You don't have to rush." She looked up, confused. "I'm not rushing, sir." McPherson glanced at her briefly. "You always are." The words weren't accusatory, just observant. Rachel didn't know how to respond, because he wasn't wrong. She was always rushing. To prove. To earn. To survive. "I'm used to it," she said quietly. McPherson nodded slightly. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, "You don't have to be here." The statement hung between them. Soft, but heavy. Rachel's fingers tightened slightly around the spoon. "Old habits don't change easily," she replied. McPherson looked at her then. Really looked. "And trust doesn't either," he added. That made her pause. Because now, they weren't talking about cooking anymore. A brief silence passed. Not uncomfortable, but aware. Then Daniel broke it. "Sir, do you have a favorite food?" Both adults turned to him. McPherson blinked, caught off guard. "No," he said after a moment. Daniel frowned. "Everyone has a favorite." McPherson hesitated, then said quietly, "I used to." Rachel's eyes softened slightly. "What changed?" Daniel asked innocently. McPherson looked away. "People do," he replied. The answer was simple, but it carried everything. Daniel didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. "I think you should have one again," he said. The innocence in his voice made something tighten in McPherson's chest. Because children, they believed things could be restored, even when adults knew better. Rachel placed a plate on the table. "Maybe he will," she said gently. McPherson glanced at her. "Maybe," he echoed. But his tone was different this time. Less certain. Less closed. They sat together. Not as equals. Not as family. But not as strangers either. Somewhere in between. Breakfast was quiet, but not empty. Small glances. Subtle pauses. Moments where words weren't needed. Daniel talked the most. About little things. Unimportant things. But somehow, they mattered. Because for the first time, McPherson listened. Not out of obligation, but presence. After the meal, Daniel ran off to play, leaving the two of them alone. Rachel began clearing the table. "You don't have to do that immediately," McPherson said. She paused, then gave a small smile. "I like finishing what I start." McPherson watched her for a moment, then said, "You don't have to prove anything here." The words were quiet, but they hit deep. Rachel looked at him, really looked. And for a second, her guard slipped. "Everyone has to prove something somewhere," she said softly. McPherson didn't argue, because he knew. She was right. A silence followed, but this one felt different. Not distant, not tense. Just real. Then, something unexpected happened. Rachel laughed, softly, almost to herself. McPherson frowned slightly. "What?" She shook her head. "Nothing." He didn't move. "Tell me." Rachel hesitated, then said, "It's just strange." "What is?" She met his gaze briefly, then looked away again. "This," she said. McPherson's brow furrowed. "Talking to you like this." A pause. "It doesn't feel like I'm talking to someone I should be afraid of." The honesty caught him off guard. "I never asked you to be afraid," he said. Rachel nodded. "I know." Another pause. Then, "But people like you. You don't usually make space for people like me." There it was again. That line. That divide. McPherson leaned back slightly, studying her. "And yet you're here." Rachel smiled faintly. "Yes." A beat. Then, And somehow, it doesn't feel like I'm just here to work anymore. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence. Heavy. Fragile. McPherson's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes did. Don't misunderstand, he said carefully. Rachel nodded quickly. I won't, sir. But deep down, she already had. Not in assumption, but in feeling. Because something was growing. Slowly. Quietly. Something neither of them had planned for. And that made it dangerous. Because the more real something feels, the more it can hurt when it breaks. Backhand index pointing right. Let's pause here. Do you think they're getting too close too fast? Or is this the kind of connection that only happens when two broken people meet? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know what you think. The morning started like the others. Quiet. Predictable. Almost peaceful. But peace in McPherson's world had never been something that lasted long. Rachel moved through the kitchen with steady hands, humming softly under her breath. Daniel sat nearby, drawing on a small sheet of paper one of the staff had given him. Everything felt normal. Too normal. And in McPherson's office upstairs, that was exactly what he noticed. He sat behind his desk, staring at a document without reading it. Something was off. He couldn't explain it. But he felt it. A subtle tension in the air. Like something waiting to break. His phone buzzed. Once. Then again. He glanced at the screen. A message from an old associate. We need to talk. Urgent. About the woman staying in your house. McPherson's eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't told anyone. No one outside his immediate household should even know. He picked up the phone and replied. Explain. The response came quickly. Too quickly. She's not who you think she is. McPherson's jaw tightened. He leaned back slowly in his chair, his expression hardening. People always had agendas. Always. Downstairs, Rachel was unaware. She had stepped out briefly to the garden, carrying a basket of laundry. The sunlight filtered through the trees, soft and warm against her skin. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Not as a survivor. Not as someone waiting for the next crisis. But as someone simply existing. Rachel. She turned. Grace stood a few feet away. Her expression different from usual. Not friendly. Not hostile. But serious. Yes. Rachel responded. Grace hesitated. Then said quietly. You should be careful. Rachel frowned slightly. Careful? About what? Grace glanced toward the house. Then back at her. People don't just walk into this kind of life without being noticed. Rachel's grip on the laundry basket tightened slightly. I'm not doing anything wrong. Grace nodded slowly. I know. A pause. But others might not see it that way. Before Rachel could respond, a voice interrupted. Rachel. McPherson. He stood near the doorway leading to the garden, his presence firm, his expression unreadable. Come with me, he said. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in between. Rachel exchanged a brief look with Grace, then followed him. Inside the house, the atmosphere had shifted. Heavier. Tighter. McPherson walked ahead of her into the living room. Stopped. Turned. Sit, he said. Rachel blinked. Confused. But she obeyed. Something in his tone had changed. Not anger. Not exactly. But distance. Sharp. Controlled. What is it, sir? She asked carefully. McPherson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed his phone on the table between them. Do you know anyone named Victor Adeyemi? He asked. Rachel froze. Just slightly. But enough. The reaction didn't go unnoticed. Yes, she said slowly. McPherson's eyes locked onto hers. And why didn't you mention it? Rachel's breath caught. I didn't think it was important. Important? McPherson repeated, his voice lowering slightly. Your ex-husband is involved in financial disputes with people in my circle. And you didn't think that was important? The words landed like a blow. Rachel stood abruptly. That has nothing to do with me. McPherson's expression hardened. Doesn't it? Silence. The air between them changed instantly. The fragile balance they had built cracked. You think I came here because of him? Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly now, not with fear, but with emotion. McPherson didn't answer immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. I didn't even know he had connections like that, she continued. My life ended with him the day he walked away. McPherson's jaw tightened. Convenient. That word. Cold. Sharp. Accusing. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. Convenient. You show up at my gate, he said firmly, with no background, no references, nothing, just a story and a child. And suddenly your ex is tied to people who are trying to get close to me? Rachel shook her head. No, that's not. Then explain it, he interrupted. Her voice broke slightly. I can't explain something I didn't plan. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was tense. Fragile. Ready to explode. Daniel appeared at the edge of the hallway, sensing something was wrong. Mummy. Rachel turned immediately. Stay there, she said quickly, her voice soft but urgent. Daniel froze. Confused. McPherson watched the interaction, then looked back at Rachel. You're asking me to trust you, he said quietly. But you withheld something that directly connects you to people who might have an interest in this house. Rachel's eyes filled slightly, but she held her ground. I didn't come here with any hidden agenda. Everyone says that, McPherson replied. That was the breaking point. Rachel laughed faintly, but there was no humor in it. So that's what this is, she said, her voice trembling now. An assumption? McPherson didn't respond. You think I left everything behind just to what? Get close to you, she continued. Is that what you think of me? Silence. And in that silence, the answer was clear. McPherson's expression didn't soften. If anything, it became more guarded. I think people do what benefits them, he said. Rachel nodded slowly, pain settling in her chest. Then you've already made up your mind. McPherson didn't deny it. That was worse. Rachel stepped back slightly, her voice quieter now, more controlled. I came here because I had no place else to go. A pause. Then, I didn't ask to be questioned like a suspect. McPherson's eyes flickered slightly, but he remained still. You're free to leave, he said. The words were calm, but final. Rachel froze. For a second, she didn't move. Leave. Just like that. After everything. After the meals. The conversations. The moments that had begun to feel like something more. Is that what you want? She asked softly. McPherson didn't answer immediately. But his silence was an answer. Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes lowering, not in defeat, but in understanding. Then I won't stay where I'm not trusted, she said. Her voice was steady, but her heart wasn't. She turned toward the hallway. Daniel stood there, watching. Come, she said gently. He looked between her and McPherson, confused. Are we leaving? Rachel nodded. Yes. Daniel hesitated, just for a second, then walked to her, holding her hand tightly. McPherson watched them, saying nothing, doing nothing. And as they walked past him, something inside him shifted. But he didn't stop them. Because pride had taken the lead. And by the time they reached the gate, Rachel's steps were slower, heavier. Not because she didn't have a place to go, but because she had briefly believed she had found one. The gate opened. The same gate she had once walked through with hope. Now she walked out with something else. Not anger, not bitterness, but disappointment. And behind her, McPherson stood alone, watching, silent, unmoving. But inside, a war had begun. Because for the first time since his mother died, he had let someone get close enough to matter. And now, He had pushed them away. Backhand index pointing right. This is the lowest point of the story. What do you think McPherson will do next? Will he realize his mistake, or let pride win? And more importantly, was he right to doubt her? Tell me in the comments. I'm really interested in your thoughts. The night felt longer than usual, not because time had slowed, but because silence had taken over where presence used to be. McPherson sat alone in his study. The same chair, the same desk, the same documents, but nothing felt the same. He hadn't touched his work, hadn't taken a single call, hadn't eaten. Instead, he replayed the moment. Again. And again. Rachel's face. Her voice. The way she looked at him. Not with anger, but with something far more painful. Disappointment. You've already made up your mind. Those words echoed louder than anything else. McPherson leaned back, running a hand over his face. Why does this bother me? He muttered to himself. Because it wasn't just about trust. It was about something deeper. Something he had avoided his entire life. Connection. He stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Outside, the compound was quiet. Empty. Just like it had always been. But now, it felt different. Because the absence of her presence made the house feel larger. And lonelier. Across the city, in a small, dimly lit room, Rachel sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't hers. Daniel had fallen asleep beside her, exhausted from the day, unaware of the emotional weight his mother carried. Rachel stared at the wall, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Still, quiet. But her mind wasn't. She replayed everything. The gate, the house, the conversations, the laughter, the moments that had almost felt like belonging. And then, the accusation, the doubt, the dismissal. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a slow breath. I won't stay where I'm not trusted. The words she had spoken still felt firm, but beneath them was something else. Regret. Not because she had lied, but because she had hoped. Rachel stood slowly and walked to the small window. The night air was cool, calm, unforgiving. Was I wrong? She whispered to herself. Not about leaving, but about believing. Because somewhere along the way, she had started to feel safe. And safety was something she had almost forgotten how to experience. Back in his study, McPherson picked up his phone, paused, then unlocked it. His thumb hovered over Rachel's contact, saved only recently. He hadn't called her before. Not once. Now he hesitated. Because calling her would mean admitting something. That he was wrong. Or at least uncertain. And McPherson had never been uncertain in matters he controlled. But this, he didn't control this. He lowered the phone slowly, then placed it back on the table. No, he muttered. But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. Meanwhile, in her room, Rachel made a decision. She stood up, walked to her bag, and began folding her clothes neatly, one by one, calm, methodical. She wasn't crying, wasn't panicking. She was choosing. Because staying wasn't an option anymore. Not under suspicion. Not under doubt. Daniel, she whispered gently, touching his shoulder. We'll leave in the morning. The boy stirred slightly. Mummy, are we going back to our old place? Rachel paused. No, she said softly. Not that place. Then where? Rachel hesitated. Just for a moment. Somewhere we'll start again. Daniel nodded sleepily. Okay. He trusted her. Completely. And that trust was something Rachel held on to tightly. Because she had lost too many things already. She wouldn't lose her dignity too. Morning came. Slow. Quiet. McPherson hadn't slept. He sat in his study, unchanged from the night before. Thinking. Deciding. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Regret. Not over a business deal. Not over a financial decision. But over a person. He stood abruptly, grabbed his keys, and walked out of the house without hesitation. For the first time, he wasn't acting from control. He was acting from something else, something deeper, something he had ignored for too long. Meanwhile, Rachel stood at the edge of the street with Daniel, waiting for a taxi. Her bag rested at her feet, her posture calm, resolved. But her eyes kept drifting back, not because she expected anything, but because part of her still hoped. "Come," she said softly to Daniel. Just as she reached for his hand, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Rachel." She froze. Slowly she turned. McPherson stood a few steps away, breathing slightly heavier than usual, as if he had rushed. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. Rachel didn't speak. Neither did he. Because now, words weren't enough. McPherson took a step forward, then another, stopping just in front of her. "I was wrong," he said. The words came out simply, directly, without decoration. Rachel's expression didn't change immediately, but her eyes softened, just slightly. "I shouldn't have doubted you," he continued. A pause. Then, "I let my assumptions speak louder than my judgment." Silence. Rachel looked at him carefully, searching, not for perfection, but sincerity. "And now?" she asked quietly. McPherson didn't hesitate this time. "Now, I want you to stay." The words were not commanding, not demanding. They were asking. For the first time, Rachel's grip tightened slightly on Daniel's hand. "You sent us away," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "You didn't trust me." "I didn't." Another pause. Rachel's eyes glistened faintly, but she didn't look away. "Trust isn't something you ask for after breaking it," she said. McPherson nodded slowly. "I understand." Silence again. Then, "I'm not asking you to forget," he added. A beat. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to rebuild it." Rachel studied him, longer this time. Not the billionaire, not the man with power, but the man standing in front of her, willing to admit he was wrong. That mattered. More than pride, more than status. Daniel tugged her hand slightly. "Mummy." She looked down at him, then back at McPherson. And in that moment, she made her choice. Not based on fear, not based on convenience, but on something deeper. "Trust is earned," she said softly. McPherson nodded. "I know." Rachel took a slow breath, then added, "But so is forgiveness." McPherson's expression softened. A rare moment. A real one. Rachel looked at Daniel, then back at McPherson. "Let's try," she said. McPherson exhaled quietly. Relief. Not loud, but real. "Thank you," he said. Not as a billionaire, not as a man in control, but as someone who had just been given something he didn't deserve, yet desperately needed. A second chance. Do you think forgiveness is stronger than pride in real life? Would you have given him another chance if you were Rachel? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. The air felt different this time. Not tense, not uncertain, but fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter everything that had just begun to heal. Rachel didn't move immediately. She stood there, still holding Daniel's hand, her eyes fixed on McPherson. Not in disbelief, not in anger, but in quiet evaluation. Because this moment mattered. More than any promise. More than any apology. McPherson stood patiently. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't rush her. Didn't control the moment. He simply waited. And that alone was different. A few seconds passed. Then a few more. Finally, Rachel gently adjusted Daniel's hand and stepped slightly forward. "On one condition," she said softly. McPherson's gaze sharpened slightly, but not defensively. "Name it." Rachel's voice remained calm. "Truth. Always." No hesitation. No games. No assumptions. If something bothers you, she continued, you ask me. McPherson nodded. Agreed. And if you don't understand something, she added, you don't assume. Another nod. Agreed. A brief pause. And, she hesitated slightly. This was the hardest part. McPherson noticed. Go on. Rachel met his eyes. You treat us like people, not charity. The words landed quietly, but deeply. McPherson didn't respond immediately, not because he disagreed, but because he understood the weight behind it. I will, he said finally. Rachel studied him one last time, searching, testing. Then slowly she nodded. Okay. That single word changed everything. Daniel smiled, sensing the shift. Are we going back, Mummy? Rachel looked at him and gently brushed his hair. Yes. But this time, her voice carried something new. Not survival. Not desperation. Choice. McPherson stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the car that had just arrived. The driver stood waiting respectfully. Rachel picked up her bag. But this time, McPherson reached out. Let me, he said. She paused, then handed it over. It wasn't about the bag. It was about the gesture. For the first time, there was no hierarchy between them, just balance. As they entered the car, Daniel climbed in first, excited despite everything. Rachel followed. McPherson closed the door gently behind them before entering the front seat. The drive back was quiet, but not uncomfortable. It was reflective. Rachel looked out the window, watching the city pass by. The same roads. The same buildings. But now, everything felt slightly different. Not because the world had changed, but because her position in it had. McPherson sat in the front, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror, not to check on her, but to acknowledge her presence. Something he had never done before. When they arrived at the mansion, the gates opened slowly, but this time, Rachel didn't feel like an outsider. She stepped out of the car with Daniel, looked at the house, the same structure, the same luxury. Yet somehow, it no longer felt distant. McPherson approached beside her. This is your home now too, he said quietly. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She simply took a step forward, then another. Not rushing, not hesitating, just walking in. Daniel ran ahead slightly, excitedly exploring. His laughter echoed faintly through the halls. Rachel watched him, a soft smile forming on her face. McPherson noticed. And for the first time, he smiled too, not out of obligation, but because something inside him had shifted. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, things began to change. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. McPherson began coming home earlier. Not for appearances, but because he wanted to. He started sharing meals at the table. Not alone, but with Rachel and Daniel. At first, conversations were minimal, careful, measured. But over time, they became natural. Rachel would cook, just as she had promised. Not as an obligation, but as an expression of care. McPherson in turn began to listen, truly listen, not interrupting, not judging. And for Daniel, the mansion became a place of laughter, not silence. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Daniel had already fallen asleep on the couch. Rachel gently placed a blanket over him. McPherson sat nearby, watching the scene quietly. You've changed this place, he said softly. Rachel looked at him. Not me, she replied. Just what was already missing. McPherson nodded. There was a pause. Then he said something unexpected. I used to think control was strength. Rachel listened. But I've realized, connection is. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She understood what he meant. Because she had learned something too. That being enough was never about wealth or status. It was about presence. And courage. McPherson turned slightly toward her. Thank you for not giving up. Rachel met his gaze, a quiet smile forming. Thank you for learning. Silence settled between them, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of understanding. Full of healing. Full of something neither of them had expected to find. Love. Not rushed. Not forced. Not perfect. But real. McPherson leaned back slightly, exhaling. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he was no longer alone in it. Rachel looked at Daniel once more, then at the home that now felt like hers. And in her heart, she knew. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was a new beginning. A second chance for both of them. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story. Before we begin, let me ask you something. What would you do if the only thing you had to offer the world was your honesty? Welcome to Ms. Love Stories, where every story begins with a heartbeat and ends with something you never see coming. Tonight's story begins with a woman who had nothing. No wealth, no connections, no safety net, just a child and a desperate need to survive. She stood outside a massive gate, staring at a world she didn't belong to. A world of silence, power, and luxury. Her hands trembled, not because she was afraid of the building, but because of what she was about to say. The doors opened, and before her stood a billionaire, a man who had everything, except trust. He looked at her cold, distant, unreadable, and then she said the words that would change everything. I don't have much to offer, sir, but I can cook. Silence. Not laughter. Not rejection, just silence. Because in that moment, he wasn't looking at her. He was judging her, measuring her, questioning her intentions. And what he saw made him suspicious. Too poor, too desperate, too perfect. So he made a decision, one assumption, that would set everything into motion. What he didn't know was that this woman carried something far more powerful than money. Something that couldn't be faked. Something that couldn't be bought. And what he chose to believe in that moment would either destroy her or bring them both to something neither of them ever expected. But here's the question. When trust is broken, can it ever truly be rebuilt? Or is one moment enough to change the entire story forever? Stay with us, because this story doesn't just test love. It tests pride, truth, and second chances. And what happens next will leave you thinking long after it ends. If you're new here, welcome to Ms. Love Stories Red Heart. We tell stories that stay with you. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe now. Backhand index pointing right, turn on the notification bell and click to watch to full video. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends.